Hey there! Today I'm chatting with Christina Jennings, the chairman and CEO of Shaftesbury. Christina has produced many successful shows such as Murdoch Mysteries, The Listener, Overruled, Life with Derek, and Regenesis. Her company is pushing the boundaries of digital content with shows like State of Sin and Backpackers, and she's here today to tell us a little bit more about her story. Hi, Christina.
Hey, how are you?
It's nice to
meet you.
All right. So, first question I wanted to ask you was, what got you interested in media? Did it start from a young age?
It's interesting. I think from a young age I was a serial entrepreneur. And my circumstances were that probably when I was about 13 I started working. And by the time I was 15 or 16 I realized there weren't always jobs out there when you wanted them. So therefore the only way that I would be certain to have employment over the summer was to create my own jobs. So starting when I was about 16, I started a landscaping company and I did a bunch of things, but it was always around my determining my future. So to be candid, it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I actually settled on media as a profession. My family, my father, my grandfather were journalists. My brother has since become a journalist, so we had journalism in the family. Arts was very important in my family, but I never thought I would do that profession. So as I say, serial entrepreneur. I went to U of T, came out of U of T, took a job at the City of Toronto at the time for a couple of years, and then I bought a travel agency and I bought a restaurant. We started a restaurant, and I had a planning business, and it was in the course of all that I started meeting media people, and I realized that, you know what? I like this business. I like the sound of it. I like telling stories. I like teamwork. So it was in my 20s that I settled on the media.
But you always really wanted to be your own boss.
Oh, I never knew any other way.
Well, can you tell me when you decided to start Shaftesbury, when you sort of coursed your career into that direction?
After I suppose I had been a town planner for about I think it's about 5 years when I realized that I hadn't quite turned 30, and I realized that I loved town planning, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do with my life. And so I met all these film and television people, and I realized that I liked what they did. And so I went out because I didn't go to university for media studies or college. So I had no background. So the only way to get a background is actually to do every single job.
Just jump into it.
And I was a PA on some commercials. I was helping out in locations. I was in the editing room. I did whatever I could to get a hands-on experience. And so that was great, and I made a bunch of shows. I came up with ideas, and I look back now, and I think one of my first shows was actually something for kids that I brought brands into the financing it of. And so I look back, and now everyone's talking about brands financing content. I was doing that back in, like quite a few years ago, more than 20 odd years ago. So when you ask the question of when did Shaftesbury come about, I had made one low budget feature, which was someone else's script, and I helped them sort of realize their dream, writer-director, so I did that. And then I wanted to do my own things. I wanted to sort of have my creative signature on things. And my sister, who was a musician, happened to have spent some time down in Southampton, Long Island, and she rented a gardener's cottage on a large estate. And the woman was in her 80s, and she was a classical violinist, and she'd been quite famous. And my sister would always tell me these stories about how a young woman in her 20s and a woman in her 80s came together through music, and the stories were extraordinary. Anyway, that begat a film called Camilla, which I made for about $10 million. It was the first film I made. Miramax was my partner, which was quite an experience. It was a real learning by fire working with Harvey Weinstein.
I was about to say, how was Harvey Weinstein?
Yeah, no, he's passionate. You can love him or hate him, but you cannot quarrel with the fact that the man is passionate about his work. And he has a strong vision, and what happens is sometimes the visions of a director-writer might collide with Harvey. But so we had a pretty good experience. But while I was making that film, I realized that I didn't want to work out of my house, that I wanted to build a company that I liked teamwork, and I liked I like having a lot of balls going at the same time, and you can't do that when you're one person working on one film. So I made quite a bit of money from the film, and I took all that money and I invested it, in effect, in myself in Shaftesbury. And I reached out to a lawyer and I reached out to an accountant, and I said, would you like to join me in Shaftesbury? And that's, over 20 years ago.
Wow. Now, learning that you can't do everything alone is a really important lesson, especially for a newer producer. Do you have any other important lessons that you learned in the early days of Shaftesbury?
Well, you learn every time you do anything in life, as we all know, you learn. And I think, the lessons that I've learned, you actually, I think, learn some of your biggest lessons from failures. And you learn that you learn your own perseverance in a way. You learn to pick yourself up, and this isn't the end of the world just because I failed. And how can I learn from that? Because I always believe there is a lesson, and you will be stronger than the next go round. One of the things I learned early on was, we were making the pilot of Regenesis, which was a show that I created. It's one of the few things I've created in this business. It was around science and science investigation. I'm not a science nerd, but I love science. I just love science. And we made the pilot of Regenesis, and it was my first big 1-hour series, and it was a really big deal. It was a lot rested on how good the series would be in terms of the growth of Shaftesbury. And I'll never forget sitting in the editing room, and I looked at the pilot, and we'd spent, quite a bit of money, and I realized it wasn't good enough.
Oh, wow.
And I realized that it really wasn't good enough. And we reshot about 50% of the pilot. I never asked anyone for a dime. We just did it ourselves. Because I realized that if I didn't think it was good enough, then it wasn't good enough. And if I wanted not only that first series to be a hit, but I repeat, as Regenesis went over 4 years. And so that lesson, and I'd learned that lesson, interesting, on a feature film we were making, because at the beginning, Shaftesbury started out as a feature film company, and we morphed into television. And I'll never forget, a writer had given me a script which I absolutely adored. And I saw it so clearly in my mind, and we looked for directors, and we hired a director. We were about a week before we went to camera. And I knew the writer and director had completely different visions. Oh. And I knew in the end of the day that this director had taken us so far away from the film that I and the writer, I fired him. Now,
a week from shooting?
A week from shooting.
Oh, dear.
I called the bonder, the completion bonder, and I said, it's a problem. And I called our investors, Telephone Canada. I've forgotten who else were our investors at the time. And I said, we have a big problem on our hands. And they supported me. And the lesson I learned from that was that you have to be strong in your vision. And I had a vision which happened to be a vision I shared with the writer. And sometimes people don't want to take the hard position. Oh God, I don't know, oh no, we're too far down a road, I'm not going to do it. And that's actually never going to, sort of hold you in good stead. What holds you in good stead is, I have a vision, I'm going to fight for that vision. And so those were two really crucial lessons that I got to say I take into this company. I remind people who work with me here. It's not good enough just to say, well, we shot it. Well, we shot it. And we don't have any more money. Okay, well, let's go find some money. Let's just make it the best it can be, because once it's the best it can be. So those were, I think, probably the most important lesson, was about holding on and being passionate about your vision and fighting for it, really.
The pride of stamping your name on a project and calling it yours.
It's everything. Your reputation in the world, whether you're in the media business or any other business, your reputation is everything. It's all you really have. So if you want people to say, Adam is a really great guy, look at the work he's done, then you better be proud of every single thing you've ever done in your career.
That's true.